Hey, what's happening everybody? My name's Jon Denton. I'm coming to you live from my car. Another one of the state of play gaming vlogs that I love to do. And here I'm going to be tackling the subject I've been meaning to tackle for a long time. And that is my thoughts on that most nefarious, the most controversial of subjects. Loot boxes in gaming, loot crates, whatever you want to call them. And are they as evil as we all seem to think they are? That's my question here. Okay, so these things have been around for quite a while. I guess the most obvious and first example of where they really came into the public attention within gaming, sort of outside the mobile space where they've been around for a while, was in Overwatch. They're called loot boxes. They delivered cosmetics for your characters and you get them leveling up, or you can pay for them, and they offer the chance to, as we all know, to roll some magic mystical number, get a bunch of stuff. So the main questions that have come up about this stuff, it's then crept into other games, right? The most obvious and recent one being Star Wars Battlefront 2. And I think we're always in danger in anything in gaming and in anything where people are passionate and people are, very, very involved and engaged, of sort of striking ourselves into two camps. You're either pro or for, you're either right or left. And I guess this is going to be a theme that ends up in a lot of these videos, whether I'm talking specifically about gaming or other stuff beyond that. But quite frankly, I think when it comes to this subject, there are real arguments from all sides. The argument, are they gambling? The argument, should they be allowed? The argument, should they be acceptable? The argument, are they necessary? Like, I don't think we know all the answers to any of these, but I'm going to give my thoughts on the subject, okay? So in the 13 years that I've been covering games, and the 10 plus years beyond that, 10, 15 years plus beyond that, that I've been sort of playing games, I have seen so many studios fall by the wayside, so many, countless numbers, people that I've interviewed out of jobs, amazing, high level producers and developers out of jobs. It happens all the time. It happens, in different periods, different slumps in the economy. This was happening at one point on kind of a weekly basis, and one of the most prominent ones we've had recently is Visceral, being closed by EA. So I always think, well, how do these developers and how do these studios continue to make money? And what's the difference between someone getting by, someone making healthy profits, and someone being greedy? And I don't think it's all one and the same thing. So I think in this instance, when it comes to these things, when it comes to loot boxes, you really have to look at things in a case-by-case basis. And I don't mean that as a pun, that it so obviously is. I really think that there's so many discussion points, okay? There are so many things. So let's kick off. Are they gambling? Now, by the legal definition, I personally don't believe them to be gambling in the same way that the endless adverts that you see during the football in the UK here, endless adverts for proper gambling sites where you're betting on the game, real money, chance at winning, chance of getting nothing back. Like that, to me, is the kind of legal and cultural accepted definition of what gambling is. Now, do I think that loot boxes fall into that? I don't personally. However, if you look at a dictionary definition of what gambling is, a sort of chance, a risk, then absolutely, of course they are. So I don't think you never argue against that. If you're paying for the chance to win something, it's in the same way that stickers are and things like that. And there's counter arguments to that about you can eventually buy all the stickers, and it gets really complicated. But ultimately, I think most games handle their loot boxes or cosmetic boxes or blind boxes or whatever they are in a similar sort of way. There's something that you can buy with in-game currency that give you a chance at something at high level. A lot of the time they'll give you nothing, sometimes they'll give you something useful, and you also have the opportunity to pay for more of those using real money or real money that you buy an in-game currency with. So I think one of the arguments and one of the sort of slightly dubious and slightly nefarious ways that this stuff gets reported on is that these boxes cost money, and people seem to forget and wash over the fact that most of the time, most of the boxes that are getting bought are being done purely with in-game currency and XP that's earned within the game. I would say the vast majority is that, right? I have personally never spent a penny of money or real world money on an in-game loot box, an in-game microtransaction loot box. I've never done it, and they are heavily in games that I play a lot. Rocket League, For Honor, Overwatch. I played a ton of Rainbow Six Siege. All of these games. I played a decent amount of the latest Call of Duty. all of these games have these loot boxes kind of interwoven into their structure. And For Honor, actually, as good a game as that is, probably has one of the most nefarious and unpleasant upgrade schemes out there. It's kind of almost up with Battlefront 2's, except it's not quite as complicated and confusing. But I mean, when you're talking about pay to win, you go into multiplayer and For Honor, and there are people at very, very high levels who have obviously put some money into microtransactions. Now you also need to put in a lot of time to prestige your character, which you can't do with microtransactions. However, you can buy XP boosters with microtransactions. So you come up against people who effectively are way more powerful than you in that game. And I could then get frustrated with it, jump off the game. It's just... Or pay money myself. I've not chosen to go down that path, and some people do, and it's difficult for every person. So I think the point that I'm trying to get to is that these things aren't going anywhere, right? And so we need to take them on a case-by-case basis. So Star Wars Battlefront 2, the problem with that is the progression system in that game is madness. It's madness, whether you're paying for it or not. I mean, for most of the time the game's been out, there has been no microtransactions because they were yanked, and yet the game is so utterly baffling. It reminds me of a free-to-play game where you jump in, a game like Warframe, which everybody talks about how wonderful it is now. But I remember when I jumped into Warframe at the beginning, it was so baffling because there was so much to it and so many different structures and stratas I couldn't possibly get my head around it. In Battlefront 2, a game about fucking Star Wars, it should be one of the most basic things in the world, you know, like the biggest media franchise, the biggest media name there is. And primarily, you know, something certainly aimed at a younger audience. Absolutely, there's an older audience, a nostalgic audience, people who've grown up with it. I'm not trying to disparage anybody here, but, you know, Star Wars is something that kids love. Star Wars Battlefront 2, you'd need a kid that had a very, very high grasp of understanding of what the hell was going on to even get your head around that battle system. Sorry, the loot system there. It took me 30 minutes. Sitting there, 30 minutes, and I'm not over-exaggerating there. It took me half an hour sitting there on a headset with somebody else, figuring it all out, just to do a basic progression system in a shooter, which isn't actually complicated at all. It's pretty much the same progression system that's in every shooter, just wrapped in all this absolute madness. So there, I would say that's an example of loot crates done awfully through microtransactions or not, and obviously that's given the bad name to all the other ones. An example of loot crates done well is Overwatch. A game where everything's cosmetic and you can choose to pay for the opportunity to get better stuff. Would it be better if you could just pay for the stuff you want? And you can do in some cases in Overwatch. Yes, that would probably be better for the consumer, but ultimately the developer needs to be able to make money to maintain the service, to maintain QA, to maintain customer service, all this sort of stuff that these new games as services demand in ways that older products just didn't. And you know, you're not asking to be paid you're not asking to pay a subscription or any of that sort of stuff. So I think in some cases and in some games they are perfectly justifiable, and I'm kind of always on the developers team as well as the consumers team. So let's say the publisher, but ultimately I do know, you know, people have got to get paid because people need to make a living, because people need to get paid, and you know, it's a volatile industry. I've been made redundant in this industry once, and almost made redundant twice. I've seen, you know, I've been through companies that have changed hands, and this is just in the writing side. And I know plenty of people who've lost their jobs, so many people. So I'm never really against the company, you know, balancing the books or making money. I think they're just going forward. I think the companies are going to have to be a little bit more upfront about it, and sort of it's going to become more normalised that these things are in the game. And I think this is a weird one, right? I think when they're done well, I actually quite like them, and I don't think you'll hear many people say that, but I think that's an actual reality of it, because these things wouldn't be in games if people didn't like it, because people do like that little dopamine hit that you get from blind boxes, whatever it is from our evolutionary past that makes us like that kind of random chance where you get something. Whatever it is, obviously it's intrinsic in fruit machines and things like that. But here, like, I quite like getting a loot box in most games. You know, the ones that you get a free one, and whether it's a role in Destiny or whether it's, you know, something that you get from leveling up in For Honor or Overwatch, of course. But actually less so in Overwatch because the stuff isn't impacting the game, which is twisted because I actually don't want the stuff to be impacting the game. So there's something that's buried in our DNA, obviously, that likes this sort of stuff. And, you know, that must be why people are into them, right? So, long story, I don't hate the things. I actually kind of like them when they're done well. So I think it's all about case by case. It's all about being measured, and it's all about being open. Now, going forward, I don't think any developer or publisher is going to be that open, because the second you see those two words together, the internet comes down on you like a ton of bricks. But, you know, how does a game, like, I love single player games, right? How do you sustain a single player, sort of quite high budget single player game in 2017, 2018 without either something that can make up for second-hand game sales or reduce game sales, reduce price game sales? It's all about balancing the books on the publisher's end, right? So, Wolfenstein 2 seems like it's not done particularly well. It was 20 quid within a week. It didn't set the charts on fire. Now, obviously, we don't know the budget of that game. We don't know how Bethesda's balancing their books. But, there's no two ways about it. We're going to be seeing less and less of these projects that you and I love, these single-player, amazing, immersive experiences, unless companies can figure out ways of doing it, or they operate on more of a movie-style studio approach where they tentpole, right? So you have the game that has the loot boxes in there, and that kind of covers the other stuff. And so the brand is improved, but that's maybe what Bethesda's doing with stuff like Skyrim and Elder Scrolls Online, which I'm sure is making money hand over fist. Maybe they can use that money to bankroll some of the stuff that improves their brand, like Wolfenstein, like Prey, Dishonored, etc. And maybe those games are making money as well. That's the other thing, we don't actually know the financials. But you have to think that ultimately those games are probably losing money, and if you're a publisher out there who's taken a punt, your tentpole is going to be one of those single player games with no loot boxes, with no microtransactions, as honourable and as good and as beautiful as that would be. Realistically, it's just probably not going to make the money that you need it to make. 4K assets, massive teams, fine if you're scaling down to indie level, but going forward it's going to have to be case by case. That's what I'm coming to right now. We're going to have to look at it as if this is another aesthetic to look at. And I wish it wasn't. I wish that stuff wasn't in there. Even though I do quite like a loot box when they're done right, I kind of wish that stuff wasn't in there at all. Of course, I just wish the games were pure like they were in the PS2 era, right? Games didn't used to be pure in the arcade era. They became pure sort of SNES and particularly sort of PS2 era, when that's when they also, the art of people started to take games more seriously. Not that there wasn't artfully designed games from day naught, there absolutely were. And then as things have changed, it's just an evolution of the business, right? So unfortunately, as well as talking about visuals, as well as talking about storytelling, as well as talking about mechanics, those should still be the absolute main discussion points. But this is going to have to be another one going forward. How is it handling its longevity in terms of experience, leveling up, progression? How is it handling its progression? Perhaps that's the best way of describing it. Battlefront 2, a disaster. Other games, Assassin's Creed Origins, did you even know that had loot boxes in it? I mean, we don't know if anybody's paying for them, but I know that they're in there for a while through some work that I've done previously. But that stuff's not up front. But from what I can work out, not that different to Shadow of Wars. Shadow of War came out, there's so many different things. That stuff's in your face in Shadow of War in a way that it isn't in Assassin's Creed. So people get upset. They feel that they're being dragged over hot coals for money. They feel that they're being asked for. I totally understand that. They feel like they're being asked for more that they shouldn't have to pay when they've already laid out their £50-60 on a new game. Absolutely, I 100% understand that. So it's just going to be something that we take on a case-by-case basis. You can't make them go away. It's not going to happen. I don't care if Belgium thinks they're gambling. I don't care if Hawaii... Since when does Hawaii... It's a state. I know. A lot of love for Hawaii. I'd love to go there one day. And, Max Holloway, amazing fighter as well. But Hawaii is not going to influence the world when it comes to that sort of stuff. Just isn't. So, here we are. 2018 is coming. And this is going to be, a real discussion point. A real point of interest. Do I wish every game was like something that Nintendo produced and it wasn't in there yet? But I'm also realistic, and the little dirty capitalist in my mind, he's never going to be too mad at people making money if that's keeping other people employed, etc., etc., etc. So there we go. There's my thoughts right now. Just I reserve the right to change my opinion at any point, but there's my thoughts right now. I think there's far more insidious stuff happening in gaming. I think there's stuff that's happening in children's mobile games where adverts are flashing up, the kids are tapping without realizing that they're doing it. And that is then subscribing that person's phone to a weekly paid-by service. This just happened to my wife, where she was being charged nearly £5 a week, nearly £20 a month for something that our little boy clicked on. Should we then deny the kid from ever using the phone, etc.? Yeah, okay, that's a different argument, but realistically, there's people producing these games, and somebody, whether it's the developers, whether it's the platform holders, are allowing this type of advert to appear in games where they know perfectly well they're going to be clicked accidentally. That, to me, is far more insidious than a loot crate happening in this sort of 16 plus, 18 plus game. Not saying two wrongs make a right here, but you know, I think there are different subjects to tackle if you're going to get outraged and angry, and that will be subject of another video and many videos on this channel. So there's my thoughts right now as we come to the end of 2017 and where we are with this stuff. I wish it was all about a video all about, you know, the purity of the mechanics that are coming up in fighting games in 2018, but realistically this is where we are. This has probably been the main discussion point in gaming in 2017. So thank you very much for watching. Expect a lot more of these. Look, I've got this little car set up now, so I can do them quite easily as well as at home. If you like the idea of this channel, if you like the idea of a guy who's been around in the games industry forever, is out there consulting, writing, doing all sorts of stuff, and is just going to be getting his thoughts into the camera, then please do subscribe and share with other people. And if not, thank you very much for watching anyway. I've been Jon Denton. I'll catch you on another video soon. Peace!